I'm Sophia Wallace, and up until a few days ago, my life was, well, perfect, or so I thought. I'm 37, living in Houston, Texas, a place I've called home my entire adult life. It's hot, humid, and full of good people. My husband, Mark, and I were just about to celebrate our 10th wedding anniversary next month. 10 years, a decade, it felt like a lifetime, and yet it had flown by in a blink. We had a beautiful son, Liam, who's almost 5. He's the light of my life, a bright, curious little boy with his dad's kind eyes and my stubborn streak. We built a good life here, a comfortable, happy home surrounded by friends who felt more like family. Our kids played together, we went on vacations, celebrated holidays. We were the couple everyone looked at and said, they've got it all figured out. I used to joke with my single girlfriends that I'd taken the last good one, the last truly decent man on earth. I believed it deep down in my bones. Mark was my best friend, he was my partner in every sense of the word, we'd been through so much together. Liam's birth, for example, was terrifying. I nearly died from sepsis afterwards. It was a dark, scary time, a blur of hospital rooms and whispered prayers, but Mark was there, a constant, steady presence, holding my hand, reassuring me, taking care of everything. He was my rock, my anchor. He was an amazing dad, too. Always on the floor, playing with Liam, building towering Lego castles, reading bedtime stories with silly voices. I told him all the time how much I appreciated him, how much I loved him, and I did my best to show it every single day. We had our moments, of course, like any couple. There was a time a few years back when Mark was working an insane amount, bringing in great money, but we barely saw him. I felt like a single mom, even with him under the same roof. It was isolating, and I told him so. I was blunt. I said if things didn't change, I would be a single mom. We talked it out, really talked. He listened, he understood, and he made changes. We worked through it like we always did. Our communication was our superpower, I thought. We could always talk through anything. This past June, right before the 4th of July, we finally took this big couples trip we'd been planning for years. It was with 5 other couples, all our closest friends, people whose kids were like cousins to Liam. We went to this beautiful resort, just adults, no kids. It was supposed to be a romantic getaway, a celebration of our friendships and our marriages, and it was truly. We laughed, we danced, we stayed up late talking. Mark was affectionate, attentive. We had a great time in bed, too. Everything felt perfect. I remember looking at him across the dinner table one night, surrounded by our friends, and thinking how lucky I was, how truly blessed. I thought we were so connected, so in sync. Then Friday came, just a few days ago. I came home from work, exhausted but happy. Mark was home, but something was off. The air felt thick, heavy. He was distant, quiet. I started asking questions, gently at first, but then with more urgency as his answers felt hollow, evasive. My gut was screaming. Something was terribly wrong. I kept prying, pushing, until finally he dropped the bombshell. He said he felt like we'd just become friends, just friends. My jaw literally went slack. What was he talking about? We were best friends, yes, but we were also lovers, partners, parents. We just had an amazing vacation. Our sex life was great. It made no sense. And then he said it, the words that shattered my world. He'd found someone else, someone he worked with. He swore he hadn't cheated yet, not physically. But he said he was breaking up our marriage just like that after 10 years, after everything. I asked about counseling, pleaded with him to consider it. He just shook his head. No, he said, flat, final. I felt a cold wave of despair wash over me. What could I do? What was left to say? So I told him to leave. Maybe he should just go. I expected a fight, a plea, something, but there was nothing. He didn't fight me. He just walked out, gathered a few things, and left. He backed out of the garage, his eyes fixed on me standing there in the doorway, tears streaming down my face, holding our son, who was looking up at me, confused and scared. It was like watching a ghost leave, a part of my soul walking out the door with him. I was a wreck, an absolute shattered mess. My world had imploded, but mercifully I wasn't alone for long. My girlfriends, my amazing, wonderful girlfriends, were there in a flash. Within minutes of me making that frantic, sobbing call, they were at my door, arms wrapped around me, hot tea in my hands, their quiet presence a lifeline in the storm. They listened, they hugged me, they just sat with me while I cried until I thought there were no more tears left. The next day, I started getting fragments of information, piecing together the true horror of what had happened. I found out he had left our house that Friday, right after telling me he was ending our marriage, and immediately met up with her. The other woman, he kissed her that night. The night he left me crying and broken, he was kissing someone else. It was a punch to the gut, a betrayal so deep it left me breathless. He went to a hotel that night and they both swear she wasn't with him. But honestly, at that point, what could I believe? I had tried to call him so many times after he left on Friday, desperate for answers, for some explanation, for him to just come back. He never answered. Finally, Saturday morning he called, and suddenly his tune had changed. He wanted to work it out. The gravity of the situation, he said, had finally hit him. I just stared at the phone, numb. Why did it take so long? Why did it take leaving me, abandoning our son, and going to kiss another woman for him to realize what he was throwing away? I knew right away. The second the words left his mouth, I knew. But the revelations kept coming, each one more painful than the last. I discovered he'd been talking to this woman, a pharmacist from his hospital, for several months. Months. They'd met up multiple times after work, once even before work. They had kissed on multiple occasions. There was no sex, no oral, they both claimed, but what did that even mean? What else had they done? And the worst part, the part that twisted my stomach into knots, was that he had somehow convinced her our marriage was in shambles. He told her we were estranged, that I was a good mom and a good person, but we'd just grown apart and wanted different things. What? It was a complete fabrication, a twisted version of our reality. As far as I knew, we were perfect, we were happy. He had recently started working out and I was so proud of him. I'd been into fitness for a while and it was great to see him find that joy too. But that was the only thing that was going on, just a normal, comfortable, happy life. And now my world was upside down. He says he wants to work it out. He says there's something wrong with him, that he needs therapy. And I don't disagree with that. But how am I supposed to ever trust him again after this ultimate betrayal? The trust, once so solid, had crumbled into dust. We were just on that couple's trip, our last happy memory, and he was sending her pictures of our room, selfies of his outfits that I had helped him pick out. I was completely blindsided. And not only that, he gave no indication to anyone, not to me, not to our friends, that anything was wrong. He just acted normal, happy. It was a charade, a performance. The worst part, the part that still makes my blood boil, is how easily he left our son. He had made so many plans with this girl, things they never actually did, supposedly. But my mind kept replaying it. Where was Liam in all this? It was like we didn't exist. Like he truly thought he could just walk away from us, from his family, from his son, without a second thought. Yes, I am angry. I thought he was the most amazing dad. And now I'm asking myself, how could you leave our son? He came back to the house on Saturday and slept in the basement, a stark reminder of the wreckage he'd created. I couldn't stand to be there anymore. Sunday morning, I booked an Airbnb for Liam and me. It's small, impersonal, but it's ours for now, a temporary refuge from the chaos. I've seen my therapist and I have another appointment later this week. He's started applying for new jobs and he's made an appointment with a therapist for next week. He's making the motions. But can I ever get over this? Can I ever truly trust anyone again? The betrayal cuts so deep, a wound that feels like it will never heal. As much as I hate being in this stupid Airbnb, I'm going to write it out for the whole week. I need to think, I need to breathe, and somehow I need to figure out what to do with all this anger, all this pain, and all this betrayal. Houston's heat has a way of seeping into your bones, but for 10 years, my life with Mark was a different kind of warmth. A comforting, steady heat that chased away any chill. We built a life here, brick by brick, laughter by laughter, right in the heart of Texas. I'm Sophia Wallace, 37 years old, and until a few days ago, I genuinely believed I had it all. Not in a flashy, material way, but in the kind of deep, quiet contentment that settles over you when you know you're exactly where you're supposed to be, with exactly who you're supposed to be with. Mark and I were approaching our 10-year anniversary next month. 10 years, it felt like a lifetime in a blink all at once. We'd navigated so much, especially the terrifying days surrounding our son's birth. Little Leo, who's almost 5 now, came into the world after a truly horrific time for me. I developed sepsis, and for a while it was touch and go. I remember the white walls of the hospital room, the constant beeping of machines, and Mark's hand, always there, holding mine, never letting go. He was my rock, my anchor in a storm that threatened to pull me under. He saw me at my weakest, at my most vulnerable, and he stayed. He was more than a husband, he was my best friend. He felt like a partner, truly. I used to joke with my single girlfriends, sorry ladies, I took the last good one. He was an amazing dad, too. The way Leo's face lit up when Mark walked through the door, the patience he had for endless games of superheroes, the way he'd scoop him up and make everything better, it was pure magic. And I always made sure he knew how much I appreciated him, how much I loved him. I thought I showed it every single day. Our marriage wasn't some fairy tale without effort, of course. We had our bumps in the road like any couple. There was a period a few years back when he was working constantly. Long hours, late nights, always chasing the next project. The money was nice, don't get me wrong, and we were comfortable, but we didn't need him to work himself to the bone like that. It felt like he was a phantom in our own home, and I started to feel incredibly disconnected. Like we were just roommates sharing a roof, not partners building a life. I remember sitting him down, my voice shaking a little, but my resolve firm. I told him plainly, Mark, if we keep going this way and I have to feel like I'm living life as a single mom, then that's what I'll be, and I won't be living it with you. It was a tough conversation, but we talked it out, really talked. We made some changes, shifted priorities, and we made it work. We always did. That was the thing about us. We communicated, we fixed things, we were a team. So when we went on that couple's trip right before July 4th, I felt a familiar surge of pride and happiness. It was a trip we'd planned for years, something we'd all looked forward to. There were 5 other couples, all married, all with kids who were friends. We were a tight-knit group, practically family. Our kids called each other cousins sometimes, that's how close we were. We were in a beautiful place, the sun was shining, the laughter was constant, and Mark was right there beside me, smiling, holding my hand, making me feel like the luckiest woman alive. We had the best time, or so I thought. Last Friday, the Houston sun felt different. It felt ominous. I came home from work, tired but still buzzing from the week. Mark was home, which wasn't unusual, but something in the air felt off. A subtle shift, like a note played just slightly out of tune. It started with little things, fragments of conversation that didn't quite sit right. A hesitation in his voice, a glance that didn't meet mine. I'm not sure what it was, a gut instinct, a tremor in the force, but I knew something was wrong. I started asking questions, gently at first, then more pointedly. He tried to brush me off, but I kept prying. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Finally, he spoke the words, and they hit me like a physical blow. He said he felt like we had just become friends along the way. Friends, my husband, my partner, my best friend was telling me we were just friends. I stood there utterly shocked. What in the world was he talking about? We were best friends, yes, but we were so much more. We just had this incredible vacation, our sex life was great, vibrant even. I couldn't wrap my head around it. My mind raced, trying to find a logical thread in this tangled mess of words. And then he dropped the real bomb. He'd found someone else, someone he worked with. The air left my lungs, the world tilted. I felt a cold dread spread through me, numbing my limbs. He quickly added that he hadn't cheated yet. The audacity of that statement, as if meeting someone, developing feelings, and then telling your wife of 10 years that you found someone else, wasn't a betrayal in itself. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and his face was unreadable. Had this man always been a stranger? "Are you breaking up our marriage?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He said yes, just like that. A decade, a family, a life reduced to a single cold word. "Can we do counseling?" I pleaded, grasping at any straw, any hope of salvaging what I thought we had. "No," he said, shaking his head. That was it. No discussion, no effort, no fight for us. The finality of it was crushing. I felt a wave of nausea. My beautiful son, Leo, was in the other room, playing with his cars, oblivious to the earthquake tearing our world apart. I had to protect him. I had to get this man, this stranger, out of our home. "Then maybe you should leave," I told him, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He didn't fight me, he didn't argue, he just did it. He walked away, gathered a few things, and headed for the door. As he backed out of the garage, I stood there, tears streaming down my face, holding our son tightly in my arms. Leo looked up at me, his brow furrowed, seeing my distress. He reached a small hand up, trying to wipe away my tears. Mark watched us, his face devoid of emotion, as he drove away. That image, him watching me crying, clutching our son, and just leaving, is seared into my memory. It was the moment I realized the man I loved, the man I thought I knew, was a ghost. I was a wreck. An absolute shattered wreck. My world had imploded, and I was left standing in the rubble, barely able to breathe. Thankfully, I have an incredible network of girlfriends. They swooped in like angels, bringing food, comfort, and an unwavering presence. They just sat with me, letting me cry, letting me rage, letting me be utterly undone. Later, through a haze of grief and anger, I started piecing together the timeline. It turned out that the hadn't cheated yet was a twisted version of the truth. He had immediately left our house that Friday and met up with her. He kissed her that very night. While he went to a hotel, he and she both swore she didn't go with him. A small mercy or another lie, I didn't know what to believe anymore. I tried calling him several times after he left on Friday, desperate for answers, for some explanation that would make sense of this insanity. He never answered. I finally heard from him Saturday morning. His tune had changed. Suddenly, the gravity of the situation had hit him, and he wanted to work it out. The sudden shift was jarring, almost comical in its abruptness if it weren't so painful. Why did it take him so long? I knew right away, the moment he uttered those words, that my life was over as I knew it. There was no confusion for me, only immediate, searing pain. The truth, or at least more of it, slowly trickled out. He had been talking to this woman from his work, a pharmacy and a hospital, for several months. Months. They had met up 2 or 3 times after work, once before work. They had kissed on multiple occasions, amongst other things, though he still maintained it never escalated to full sex or oral. But the real kicker, he had apparently told her and had her convinced that our marriage was in shambles, that we were estranged. That I was a good mom and a good person, but we just grew apart and wanted different things out of life. What? How could he paint such a picture? It was a complete fabrication. We were perfect, as far as I knew, comfortable, happy, normal. He had recently taken an interest in working out, and I had been so proud of him. I've been really into it for a while, finding solace and strength in it, so I was genuinely happy to see him find joy and benefits from it too. But that was the only thing that was going on. No major conflicts, no growing apart, nothing that would suggest our marriage was anything but solid. My world had been turned upside down by a narrative he had concocted, not by any reality I had lived. He says he wants to work it out now. He says there's something wrong with him, that he needs therapy. I don't disagree on the therapy part, but what the hell do? I still love him so much. Part of me, a deep, wounded part, wants to believe he was having some kind of psychiatric issue, a temporary break from reality, and that he's going to work on himself and this will all be fine in the end. But how could I possibly believe that after this ultimate betrayal of my trust? We were just on a couple's trip, for crying out loud, and he was sending her pictures of our room, pictures of our room. He was sending her selfies of his outfits, outfits that I helped him pick out. I have truly been blindsided, and it wasn't just me. He showed no indication of anything being wrong to any of our friends on that trip. He played the part of the devoted husband perfectly. But the absolute worst part, the part that twists a knife in my gut every time I think about it, is leaving our son. He had made so many plans with this girl, plans they supposedly never actually did, and I'm like, where in all these elaborate fantasies was your son? Where were we? It was as if we didn't exist, like he had it in his head he was just going to walk the hell away from everything. Yes, I am angry, beyond angry. I thought he was the most amazing dad. But how could an amazing dad just abandon his child like that? He came back to the house Saturday, sleeping in the basement. I couldn't stand being there anymore. The air was thick with his betrayal, with the ghost of a future that no longer existed. Sunday morning, I packed a bag for Leo and me, booked in Airbnb, and that's where we are now. A temporary refuge from the wreckage. I've seen my therapist, she's a lifeline right now, and I'll see her again later this week. He started applying for new jobs apparently and has made an appointment with a therapist for next week. Small steps maybe, but are they enough? I just don't understand how I can ever get over this betrayal. I love him despite everything, but I need him to know this is not okay. This is not something you just bounce back from. As much as I hate being in this stupid airbnb, I'm going to ride it out. I have it for a week. I need the space. I need the distance. Am I ever going to get over this? I feel like I can't ever trust anyone ever again. I am so profoundly betrayed. The warmth of Houston now feels like a burning accusation. And I'm just beginning to realize that the anger, the fury simmering beneath the surface of my grief, might just be the only thing keeping me afloat right now. It might just be the only thing strong enough to push me forward. I'm Sophia Wallace, and up until a few days ago, my life in Houston, Texas was a picture postcard. Not in a fake, perfect Instagram filter kind of way, but in a real, lived-in, comfortable, and deeply cherished way. I'm 37 and I've been married to Michael for almost 10 years. Next month would have been our anniversary, a decade of building a life together, brick by careful brick. We had our son, a little boy who is almost 5, and he was the absolute center of our universe. Every morning, watching him wake up with that messy bedhead and sleepy smile, I'd think to myself, this is it. This is what happiness feels like. Michael was more than just my husband, he was my best friend. He was the one I'd tell everything to, the first person I'd call with good news, and the steady hand I'd reach for when things got tough. I used to joke with my single girlfriends, telling them I'd snagged the last good one. He was an amazing dad, always down on the floor playing cars or reading just one more story. I made sure he knew how much I appreciated him, how much I loved him every single day. Our journey together hadn't been without its bumps, but we always navigated them. There was one period years ago when Michael was working nonstop and I felt like we were just roommates. I felt like a single mom even though he was right there. I remember sitting him down, laying out how I felt, telling him that if things continued that way, I'd have to act like a single mom for real. We talked it out, made some changes, and we got back on track. We always did. That was the beauty of us. Our communication was solid, our foundation unshakable, or so I believed. Just a few weeks ago, we'd been on this incredible couples trip. There were 5 other couples, all our closest friends. Our kids grew up together, called each other cousins. We'd planned this trip for years, looking forward to it, and it finally happened right before July 4th. We had the best time. Seriously, the best time. Laughing, sharing stories, just enjoying each other's company under the warm sun. Michael was himself, attentive, funny, loving. He seemed just as happy as I was. We even sent silly selfies back home to our friends who couldn't make it, showing off the beautiful hotel room, the outfits I'd helped him pick out. Everything felt perfect. That's why Friday hit me like a physical blow. I came home from work tired but looking forward to our usual evening routine. Michael was there, but something felt off subtly at first, like a misplaced note in a familiar song. His answers were a little too brief, his eyes not quite meeting mine. I started asking questions, gentle at first, then more persistent as my unease grew. It was a slow unraveling, like pulling a loose thread until the whole sweater comes apart. Finally, he confessed. He said he felt like we had just become friends along the way. I stared at him, my mind scrambling to make sense of his words. What was he talking about? We were best friends, yes, but we were also lovers, partners, a team. We just had that incredible vacation, our sex life was great, our son was thriving, it made no sense. And then the real gut punch came, he'd found someone else, someone from his work. He swore he hadn't cheated yet, but the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. I asked him if he was breaking up our marriage, if this was it, and he just said yes. A simple, devastating yes. I tried to grasp at straws, suggesting counseling, anything to fix whatever invisible crack had appeared. He refused. That's when I told him maybe he should just leave. I expected a fight, an argument, a desperate plea to stay, but he didn't fight me, he just went. He packed a small bag, his eyes strangely blank, and walked out. The image of him backing his car out of the garage, watching me cry, holding our confused little boy, is burned into my memory. It was cold, so utterly cold. I was a wreck, a complete mess of tears and confusion. Luckily, my amazing girlfriends rallied around me immediately. They were at my side within minutes, their presence a small comfort in the overwhelming wreckage of my world. Later, through a haze of grief, I found out the truth about his immediate departure. He hadn't gone to a hotel alone as he claimed. He had immediately left our home and met up with her, the woman from his work. He kissed her that very night. He went to a hotel, yes, but they both swore up and down that she hadn't gone with him. A technicality perhaps, but it felt like another knife twist. I called him several times that Friday night, desperate for answers, for anything that would make sense of the chaos. He never answered. Saturday morning, he finally called. His tune had changed. Suddenly, the gravity of the situation had hit him and he wanted to work things out. I don't know why it took him so long. I knew right away, the moment he uttered those terrible words, what this meant. The truth kept unraveling bit by painful bit. He'd been talking to this woman, a pharmacist at the hospital where he worked, for several months. They'd met up multiple times after work, once even before. They had kissed on multiple occasions, and there were other things, but never, they insisted, sex or oral. But the real betrayal, the insidious, sickening part, was how he had painted our marriage to her. He'd convinced her that our marriage was in shambles, that we were estranged, that I was a good mom and a good person, but we just grew apart and wanted different things. What kind of twisted reality had he been living in? I had no idea where any of this came from. As far as I knew, we were perfect. He'd recently started working out, and I was so proud of him. I've been really into fitness for a while, so it was wonderful to see him find that joy too. But that was the only new thing in our lives. We had a normal, comfortable, happy life. My world had been turned upside down, shattered into a million pieces. Now he says he wants to work it out. He says there's something wrong with him, that he needs therapy. I don't disagree, but how am I supposed to believe any of it after this ultimate betrayal of my trust? We were just on a couple's trip, and he was sending her pictures of our hotel room, sending her selfies in the outfits I'd helped him pick out. I was truly, utterly blindsided. Not only that, he was with all our friends, our extended family, and he gave no indication whatsoever that anything was wrong. He was laughing, smiling, holding my hand, all while planning a secret life. The worst part, the part that truly cut me to my core, was the thought of our son. He had made so many plans with this woman, plans they supposedly never followed through on, but where was our son in all this? It was like we didn't exist, like he just thought he could walk away from us, from his family, without a second thought. Yes, I am angry. I thought he was the most amazing dad, but how could an amazing dad leave his son like that? He came back to the house on Saturday and slept in the basement, a stranger in his own home. Sunday morning, I couldn't bear to be there anymore. I booked an Airbnb for me and our son. That's where we are now, in a temporary space, living out of suitcases, trying to make sense of a world that no longer makes sense. I've seen my therapist, and I'll see her again later this week. She's helping me sort through the tangled mess of emotions. He, on the other hand, has started applying for new jobs and has an appointment with a therapist next week. Steps perhaps, but they feel so small, so insignificant against the monumental damage he's done. I just don't understand how I can ever get over this betrayal. I love him so much, but I need him to know that this is not okay. As much as I hate being in this stupid Airbnb, I'm going to write it out. I have it for a week. I need the space, the distance to process. Am I ever going to get over this? I feel like I can't ever trust anyone again. The betrayal runs so deep, it feels like it's in my bones. The hum of the air conditioning unit in the Airbnb was a constant, low thrum against the backdrop of my shattered life. Every breath felt like a shallow imitation of living, every moment a stark reminder of how quickly everything could unravel. It had been just days since Mark packed his bags, days since I stood there, clutching our son Leo as he backed out of the garage. Days since he broke not just my heart, but the very foundation of our existence, all for a fleeting fantasy with a woman from his work. Leo, bless his innocent heart, seemed to take to the change of scenery with a surprising resilience. He thought it was an adventure, a special sleepover at a new friend's house. I'd catch him giggling as he explored the unfamiliar rooms, his small, unburdened joy a sharp contrast to the lead weight in my own chest. It was for him, I kept telling myself. Every agonizing decision, every tear I swallowed, every painful realization, it was all for Leo. He deserved a mother who was whole, not one perpetually fractured by a man's lies. Mark, of course, had changed his tune. The gravity of the situation he'd finally admitted had hit him. It took him a whole day, a whole night of leaving me and our son to cry, a whole night spent at a hotel for him to realize the enormity of his actions. He'd called Saturday morning, his voice thick with a forced sincerity, wanting to work it out. He'd even returned to the house, exiled himself to the basement like some penitent ghost. A part of me, the part that had loved him fiercely for a decade, wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe this was a temporary lapse, a midlife crisis, some strange psychiatric issue as he'd suggested. But the bigger, colder part of me, the one that had been betrayed down to its very marrow, knew better. He was applying for new jobs, he'd told me. He'd made an appointment with a therapist. All the right moves, all the checkboxes ticked, but it felt performative. It felt like he was trying to fix a broken vase with sticky tape when the pieces had been ground into dust. He said he and this woman, this pharmacy tech, had only kissed on multiple occasions amongst other things, but never sex or oral. Never sex or oral. The sheer audacity of his confession, as if that somehow made it less of a betrayal. As if kissing someone else intimately repeatedly while married and on a couple's trip, while sending her pictures of our room and selfies of his outfits that I helped him pick out, wasn't the ultimate violation of every vow we'd ever made. The air in the Airbnb was stale with my grief, but slowly something else began to seep in. Something hot and bitter. Anger. Raw, unadulterated anger. It wasn't just about the physical act of cheating, it was the psychological warfare he'd waged. The deliberate deception, the calculated cruelty of building a fantasy life with someone else while assuring me everything was perfect. He had convinced her that our marriage was in shambles, that we were estranged. Estranged? We were just on a vacation, a trip we'd planned for years with our closest friends, our kids, calling each other cousins. He was sending her pictures of our life, framing it as a lie, while I, Sophia Wallace, his devoted wife, lived completely in the dark. I thought about all the little moments, the tiny cracks I hadn't seen. His newfound interest in working out, something I'd celebrated, seeing it as a positive step for him. Was that when it started? Was he getting in shape for her? The thought was a fresh stab, and the way he'd just walked away, watching me cry, holding Leo. As if we didn't exist. As if he could just erase a decade of shared history, a lifetime of promises, and the very existence of our son with a wave of his hand. My girlfriends had been incredible. They rallied around me, a protective circle of fierce loyalty. They brought food, listened to my rambling, held my hand through the worst of the sobs. They confirmed what I already knew: this was not normal. This was not a simple growing apart. This was a calculated, selfish act of betrayal. And as their words echoed in my head, a new resolve began to harden within me. I spent hours pacing the small living room of the Airbnb, Leo asleep in the bedroom, oblivious to the turmoil. My therapist had told me it was okay to be angry, to feel every ugly emotion that surfaced. But anger wasn't just an emotion anymore, it was becoming a fuel. Fuel for what? I wasn't entirely sure, but the embers were glowing. I thought of his casual dismissal of our son, his plans with this new woman, his willingness to just abandon everything we'd built. He had robbed me of my peace, my trust, and very nearly my sanity. And for what? A cheap thrill, a fleeting fantasy. The idea of just getting over this felt like an insult. How could I ever look at him the same way? How could I ever trust anyone again, let alone the man who had been my rock, my best friend, the father of my child? No, getting over it wasn't an option. Justice felt like a better word, or perhaps retribution. A quiet, precise retribution that would make him understand the depth of the pain he had inflicted, not just on me but on Leo. I started observing him more closely during his brief visits to the Airbnb to see Leo. He was trying to be the amazing dad he once was, bringing toys, reading stories, but even those interactions felt strained, tinged with his underlying guilt and my simmering resentment. He kept suggesting couples counseling, something he'd flat out refused just days before. He wanted to talk, to work through it. But all I heard were hollow words, desperate attempts to patch up a facade he himself had shattered. I remembered the Reddit post I'd seen years ago about a woman who had meticulously documented her husband's affair, gathering evidence, slowly building a case. At the time, I'd read it with a detached curiosity, thankful it wasn't my life. Now it felt like a blueprint. He was trying to minimize his actions, to frame it as a mutual drifting apart, a misunderstanding. But I knew the truth, and the truth, I realized, could be a very powerful weapon. My mind began to shift. The tears still came, but they were fewer, and they were often tears of frustration, not just sorrow. I started thinking strategically. What did he value? His reputation, certainly. His career, undoubtedly. His image as the amazing dad and devoted husband, which he had so carefully cultivated among our friends and family. That was a vulnerability, a gaping wound I could expose. The couple's trip. The timing of his betrayal, sending pictures to her from our shared space while surrounded by our closest friends. It was an insult to them too, an insult to the sanctity of our friendship circle. Our friends who had been so supportive of me deserved to know the full extent of his duplicity. This wasn't just my secret to keep. His lies had seeped into our shared social fabric. I began to gather my thoughts, to piece together a timeline of his lies. The several months he'd been talking to her. The 2-3 times after work and once before they'd met up. The multiple occasions amongst other things. It was a mosaic of deceit, and he thought he could just smooth it all over with a few therapy sessions and a new job application. No, not this time. Sophia Wallace was no longer the naive wife who believed her husband was the last good one. That woman had died the moment he backed out of the garage, leaving me in tears, holding our son. A new woman was emerging from the ashes of that shattered life. A woman who was tired of being underestimated, overlooked, and most importantly, betrayed. And she was ready to fight for what was hers. Not just the house, not just the financial security, but her dignity, her peace of mind, and Leo's future untainted by his father's deceit. The first step, I decided, was to stop being reactive. It was time to start being proactive. Time to move from despair to decisive action. The Airbnb was temporary. My resolve, however, was becoming permanent. This wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. This was about justice, about making sure he truly understood the consequences of his choices, and making sure he could never inflict this kind of pain on anyone else again. My silence had empowered him. My voice, I realized, would be my loudest weapon. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, one that stretched on and on, day after agonizing day. The Airbnb, meant to be a refuge, felt more like a cage, a temporary holding cell for my shattered life. Every morning I woke with a jolt, the reality of what had happened crashing over me anew. My son, bless his innocent heart, was my anchor, his bright eyes and simple requests pulling me back from the brink of despair. But even with him, there were moments, quiet moments, when the silence was deafening and the weight of my husband's betrayal pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. I kept up appearances for my son, playing games, reading stories, making sure his world felt as normal as possible. But inside, I was a churning mess of emotions: grief, anger, confusion, and a bitter, burning desire for something, anything, to make sense of it all. My therapy sessions were a lifeline, a place where I could unpack the tangled mess of my feelings without fear of judgment. My therapist, a kind and understanding woman, listened patiently, offering insights that helped me see the situation with a little more clarity, even if it didn't lessen the pain. My husband, Mark, continued to text and call, his messages a jumble of apologies, promises of change, and pleas for forgiveness. He started therapy, he'd applied for new jobs, he swore he was a changed man, that the gravity of his actions had finally hit him. But every word felt hollow, tainted by the image of him leaving me and our son, rushing to meet her, kissing her the very night he'd broken our family apart. How could I trust him? How could I ever believe a word he said again? The betrayal felt too deep, too fundamental to our shared history. I spent hours replaying every conversation, every interaction from the past few months, searching for clues, for any sign that I had missed. Was there a moment when his eyes lingered a little too long on his phone? A subtle shift in his demeanor, but there was nothing. It had all been so carefully hidden, so meticulously woven into the fabric of our everyday lives. He had taken our perfect, comfortable world and ripped it to shreds, all while smiling and holding my hand on our couple's trip. The thought of him sending her pictures of our room, of his outfits I had helped him pick out, twisted my stomach into knots. It was a cold, calculated cruelty that I never would have imagined him capable of. I stayed at the Airbnb for the full week, clinging to the small measure of control it gave me. It was a physical manifestation of the boundary I was trying to erect between myself and the wreckage of my marriage. My friends were incredible, bringing meals, offering shoulders to cry on, and just sitting with me in silence when words failed. They reminded me of my strength, of who I was before Mark's deception cast its shadow. One evening, as I tucked my son into bed, he asked, "When is Daddy coming back?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Daddy needs some time to figure things out, sweetie," I said, a vague answer that felt utterly inadequate. But what else could I say? How could I explain to a 4-year-old that his father had chosen a fleeting fantasy over the beautiful reality we had built together? That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, the silence of the airband pressing in on me, a new feeling began to stir. It wasn't just anger or sadness anymore. It was a quiet, resolute determination. Mark wanted to work things out, he wanted to change, maybe he did. But that didn't mean I had to be part of his redemption arc. I realized then that my love for him, once a towering oak, had been chipped away, splinter by splinter, until all that remained was a hollowed-out husk. Trust, once shattered, was not easily mended, and forgiveness, if it ever came, would be for me, not for him. The next morning, I called my lawyer. My voice was steady as I explained the situation, the facts laid bare without the emotional turmoil that usually accompanied them. I was Sophia Wallace, a mother, a professional, and a woman who deserved more than betrayal. I deserved peace. I deserved a future where I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering if the rug would be pulled out from under me again. The revenge I craved wasn't about tearing him down, but about building myself back up, stronger and more resilient than before. It was about showing him and myself that I could stand on my own, that his choices, while devastating, would not define me. My focus shifted from what he had done to what I was going to do for myself and my son. This wasn't the end of my story, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I wrote the rules.